We are all a bunch of hypocrites. People who go to church are hypocrites. They sit there pretending to be holy, but they're sinners just like the rest of us. In fact, they're probably graver sinners than the rest of us. They're worse than the rest of us. This is a very popular anti-religion argument or anti-Catholic argument that we hear very often today. I think it's used because it helps people to feel justified in not going to church when they probably know deep down that they ought to be here. This bad argument that we hear touches on several lessons that appear in our gospel today. People who go to church are not necessarily hypocrites just because they continue to sin. One definition of a hypocrite is a person who puts on a false appearance of virtue and religion. This is what Jesus so often criticized in the Pharisees of his day. They placed heavy burdens on others without doing anything to help them to lift them. They presented themselves as holier than thou, but they didn't strive to try to be holy. Jesus says that the outside of the pot was clean, but the inside was filthy. Christians, on the other hand, by the fact that we are in church, are telling the whole world, I am weak. I am a sinner. I am here because I need God's help, because I cannot do it on my own. For us who are trying to follow Christ, there's a noticeable difference between what we preach at times and the life that we live. But there's a difference between being a good Christian and simply being a new type of Pharisee. And the difference is that a good Christian recognizes his shortcomings and cries out to God for help, asking for the grace to be forgiven. He cries out to God, asking for the grace to overcome his sinfulness. The gospel today tells us that Jesus, the Son of Man, came to seek and to save what was lost. And each one of us come here week after week because we in some way are lost. We need to be saved by Jesus, right? We recognize our inability to do good on our own, and we come here seeking his help. We come here not just to justify ourselves, not to be hypocrites, but to climb the tree in order that we might see Jesus, so that he might call out to us, so that he might stay with us, so that he might change our hearts the same way that he changed the heart of Zacchaeus. So we're reminded today in the gospel that Jesus came to seek and to save what was lost, right? That's his whole mission. That's the whole reason why he came down to earth. And this should make us reflect on the mission of the church. The church shares in the same mission that Jesus had, to seek and to save what was lost. And we are incorporated into that mission to seek and to save what was lost through our baptism. We are both the ones being sought out as those who are lost, and we're called to seek out others who are lost, to invite others to come here and to be saved. And in confirmation, in fact, we're given a special grace to be able to do just that. The grace that we receive in confirmation confirms or strengthens our own practice of the faith, and it helps us to go out to carry on Christ's mission of bringing others to the Father so that they can experience God's mercy. We must remember that the whole goal of the church is to carry on the mission of Christ, the mission of seeking and saving what is lost. And so if the mission of the church is the same as the mission of Christ, then the church, we can expect, will be treated in the same way that Christ was treated. And how did people react to Jesus? They grumbled, they judged, they suspected that he was crazy. They said he has gone to stay at the house of a sinner. Ultimately, they scourged him, they mocked him, and they put him to death on a cross. And we can forget, right? For us, the cross is a sign of God's power and glory and victory over sin and death. But at the time of Jesus, it was very different. It was a symbol of shame. It was the way that the Romans warned people that this is going to happen to you too if you go against us. It was a tool of fear. And I say this, right, not to scare us, but to remind us, including myself, to remind myself first, that things are not going to be easy because we decide to follow Christ. I told several people that this week, and I always preface it with, I have to remind myself of this every single day. That's not what Christ told us would happen if we were his followers. He told us, instead, that if we wanted to follow him, that we needed to pick up our cross every single day and follow him. He was telling us that we would be mocked, that we would be misunderstood, that we would be humiliated, and at times even physically harmed for following him. And the history of the church confirms this. Even today, Christians around the world are being persecuted, not in spite of their belief in Jesus, but because of it. They're being put to death because they believe and follow Jesus. Again, I'm not trying to put fear in our minds, but I'm reminding us of a truth that we will experience hardships if we truly follow Christ. I'm reminding us of that because if we remember that, when we do encounter hardships, we won't become discouraged, but we'll have the strength to continue on. And so we see that sinners who go to church, you and me, are not necessarily hypocrites. We only become hypocrites if we don't acknowledge our brokenness, if we pretend to be perfect. And this has been, I think, one of the invitations and one of the fruits of the Year of Mercy, to remind us to acknowledge where we fall short, that we all do it and we should acknowledge it, and then to ask God to forgive us, to ask God to begin to heal us. That's how we become one of those lost that Jesus came to seek and to save. And we in turn are called to carry on Christ's mission of seeking others out and bringing them to experience the same mercy that we experience. The Second Vatican Council said that the church, like a stranger in a foreign land, presses forward amid the persecutions of the world and the consolations of God, announcing the cross and death of the Lord until he comes. That's our role. Like strangers in a foreign land, to press on in proclaiming the gospel no matter what difficulties come our way. And this is certainly not going to always be easy. But we remember that it wasn't easy for Jesus. Right? He told his disciples, if the world hates you, remember and realize that the world first hated me. It won't be easy, but just as Christ carried out the work of redemption in poverty and persecution, so the church is called to follow that same route, that it might communicate the fruits of salvation to men. If we persevere, if we remain faithful when things get tough, then we too will hear Jesus say, "Today salvation has come to this house," and we will lead others to Christ by our example.